good afternoon, depending on where you are tuning in from. Welcome to the Magenta Edge Digital Workshop Series. I'm Denise Davis, and this is workshop number 2 of 8. Every Thursday until April 1st, we will have a new workshop about the different facets of small business experiences. And we're happy to have you here for Designing Efficient Business Operations. To see all the articles and stories on Magenta Edge, go to and register for upcoming workshops in the series at tmobile.com/magenta. Tmobile.com/magenta edge. T-Mobile for Business will be live tweeting throughout today's workshop. Feel free to add to the conversation by clicking the Twitter icon on the dashboard on your screen and use the hashtag Magenta Edge. We're going to kick it off, and I'm super excited to be talking to you today. So let's get started. We're going to dissect and talk about designing efficient business operations. Now, this workshop will focus on infrastructure, on operations, best practices, and personnel while drawing on my own experience in building a media company. So some of the key elements from today, we're going to learn how to outline all of the details of your organization. And the goal is to really help provide the tools for you to create a roadmap plan and help expand and optimize your business, whether it's now or whether you are planning to launch a business in a post-COVID world. Now we're going to dive into the agenda and talk about lesson 1. So the first lesson I'm going to talk about is how to determine the basic elements of your business operations. Here we're going to discuss building your roadmap, building a workflow for a successful execution and foundation, and also how to look to avoid overlap in your operations and also non-essential spending. In lesson 2, we're going to talk about adapting to a new normal. The world has changed forever, as we know, and this current pandemic has kind of shifted a lot of business priorities. So we're going to go over how to smoothly adjust your company's operations, your priorities and your goals to the current now, and how to be flexible. The third lesson that I'm going to talk about is how to evaluate and measure success, how to review and determine whether your roadmap is successful, whether your workflow is working, and if it's falling short, and how to identify if it is. And now I'm going to just tell you a little bit about myself. So who am I? Who is Denise Davis? I am a film and television producer and media entrepreneur, originally from Las Vegas, Nevada. Small fun fact. Went to college in Brooklyn College in New York, came to Los Angeles and went to the American Film Institute where I got my master's in film producing. And I actually met a great multi-hyphenate by the name of Issa Rae right out of grad school. So Issa and I worked together for the last 8 years, where I was a producer at what was formerly known as Issa Rae Productions, and that became Hooray most recently. And her and I also started and built a company together called Color Creative 7 years ago that most recently is pivoted into a management company, which we'll talk a little bit about. I also produced the HBO-nominated show on HBO called Insecure, and I'm also a producer on a Black Lady sketch show, which is also on HBO. Most recently, I have actually left Issa's company to launch my own company called Reform Media Group, and I'm really looking forward to this next chapter in my career. But today, I'm going to basically take a culmination of all of my experiences and the things I've done and the things I've seen in this space as an entrepreneur of sorts, and share those advice, best practices, and tips with you as we actually just focus on business operations. So that is me in a nutshell. I'm super grateful to T-Mobile for asking me to do this, and T-Mobile for Business. Very much in support of all small business owners. And I really hope you are able to take something away today. And again, if there's anything I didn't cover, anything you are really curious about on this topic that is not in this presentation, please feel free to drop a question in the Q&A box, and I'll try my hardest to address it at the end. So we're going to go ahead and get started on lesson 1. Hope you're ready. Lesson 1. How to determine the basic elements of your business operations. So, I mentioned Color Creative. I mentioned this company that Issa and I started. we basically launched the management company at the tail end of 2019, going to 2020. And I'm going to use this as an example of how we had to sit down and basically take a company and a brand that was operating in one area and shift it to management, which was a completely different area that we had actually never operated in before, nor did we have any experience in it. And so how do we figure out what we're going to make up the elements of the core functionalities of this new business that we were basically rebuilding? To start, we had to kind of figure out what were the functions and also where do we start? We're building a brand new company, again, in an area that we had never been in before. So where to begin? I think with any company, it's always great to think of the end result and to really think when you're building a roadmap, high level, right? Think about your structures, think about your divisions in your company, and how does the execution move from point A to point B? What do I mean by execution? Well, that could be a product, that could be your company's services. It's basically what is the main function for creating this business? And once you identify that, you're essentially tracking it from the beginning of how it originates, where does it start, and then what is the end result, right? If it's a product, it's probably selling it to customers. If it is a production company like ours, it is being able to sell and create a film or television show. In a management company sense, for Color Creative, it is actually procuring and securing work and promoting the careers of our creators and making sure that they ensure success and are continuing to grow in their careers and in their field. So once you're able to kind of identify those divisions and the structures and the way your company kind of looks on the onset, you're going to take a deeper look and really think about now the personnel that you need for this to operate efficiently and for it to operate accordingly. So how do you think about the personnel? We're going to dive into that just a little bit deeper when we talk about workflow, but this is really important because as you map out your business operations, you have to ask yourself, well, who is going to do all this work? I never recommend doing it yourself, although I know a lot of small businesses start out that way. But I think through relationship and networking and also just being able to figure out who your partners are, it's so important, whether you even have to outsource the work, that you don't try to take it on all by yourself. Because as your business grows, inevitably you will need to build a team in order to ensure its growth and its efficiency. So the last thing when determining the basic elements is to create a list of equipment and resources that each role or your division will require. So, when you're mapping that out, excuse me, think of personnel where it's more than just a head count, right? What does your employees' duties consist of? What are they responsible for? And what is the bare minimum that division needs for efficiency and to get something done? Now, on the equipment and resources side, this can include different areas such as, do you need an in-house legal department? Do you need a graphic designer that's on staff? What are your internal versus external needs when it comes to equipment and resources? Because that's also where I think suppliers and vendors, suppliers and vendor relationships can really come from. And so, you'll want to map this out on a chart in any way that makes sense to you, but it's okay to kind of just do a little bit of a word vomit and throw out a beginning first rough draft of your business operations plan by identifying these 3 core areas. So I'm actually going to show you an example of a roadmap next, and we'll talk a little bit about it. It's a very fun example. This is an example of Issa Rae's company. So I did not create this, nor did Issa. We actually found this on the web probably about a year or 2 ago and shared it with our company because we were very entertained but impressed that someone from the outside, courtesy of Trapital.co, which wrote an amazing article and created this roadmap. But we were impressed that from the outset that they were able to try to figure out Issa's own roadmap only based off of press articles and things that she's talked about in various interviews. So I really wanted to bring this up because, again, this was just someone that looked at Issa and what she was building and, really tried to identify and map out all of the touch points that she was doing on the business side. So it's a blueprint of what a business strategy plan could look like. And I am going to identify and talk about a couple of the things here that you see, because again, this is meant to be used as an example. Yours does not have to look like this, but there are some things that they included that would normally go into your roadmap plan, and things that you should make sure that you're looking for when creating your own. So one of the things I want to point out here, forgive me, I have a closer one that I'm looking at. Each of these lines that you see connecting each of the squares are basically points of execution, right? They are showing you what that role does, and also points of synergy between each. Each box represents either a company or a business, essentially, that Issa is a controlled owner of. And you can see by where all of the lines meet, how they all kind of feed into each other and how they support. Now, this is a much more complex example because not everyone can build an empire like Issa Rae right away, but the important areas to note, no matter where you start, even if it's just the one company and your roadmap is actually breaking down the different divisions, you really want to, separate or identify whether you have multiple companies like such, or if you have multiple divisions. Yours would probably look a little bit like this, but be broken down into marketing, production, distribution, and so forth. So the other thing you want to make sure you know of as you map this out is, even if the companies or the divisions don't exist, but what does each of them do, right? What are the core functionalities? If I'm looking at this example, Issa Rae Productions is the main production company, whereas Rap Shit that they have here is actually a new series that was just recently announced that will be on HBO Max. So it's actually more of a product here. Radio in the Corners is another business of hers, but that is focused on music. So you can start to see and know why these things are separated and what they're supposed to do. More importantly, how do they relate to one another, right? And this is basically up to your discretion at trying to figure out how can your divisions and your companies support each of the core functionalities, and always looking at ways for synergy. It saves time, it saves money, and eventually it just really gives you the most efficient operations plan and foundation to build off of. So the other thing I want to note before we move on is that you'll notice this example does not include personnel needs. That will come next as we get into discussing how to build a workflow. You don't really need to identify how many people are working at these divisions or companies when you make a roadmap. This is really to create and design a big picture overview of how you want to see your company work with each other and how you want to see it operate. So we're now going to move on to discussing how to build a workflow. Once you have your roadmap, you really want to sit down and think about how you want it to operate, right? This is where your workflow strategy will help lead the way for hiring and personnel plans. And this is also what helps create the foundation for later growth, because you get a sense of the scope and just how small or how big you can start, and that you can achieve and aim for later years. So what's the biggest difference between a workflow and a roadmap? Well, as I mentioned, this roadmap that we saw as an example in the previous slide, again, it's a big picture company overview that showcases your synergies and your different divisions and or companies. Whereas a workflow here, we're really going to be building the workflow based off of your roadmap. So it kind of comes as a second step. And within your workflow, it is going to emphasize the execution, who is all involved, which is personnel, and how it all works, right? So I'm going to highlight and identify 3 core things to kind of think about or look for as you are building out your workflow. And the first one is, where is there overlap? Are there any personnel roles or divisions that can be combined? I'm going to give you an example after I go through these 3 tips. But the next one would be to assess what is missing. Where are there holes in your plan? Are there divisions or personnel that feels too bloated in terms of responsibilities or cost? Are there ways to combine any areas, or are there things that maybe you didn't think about that you will need in order to support your infrastructure needs or to support and ensure the success of your company? Lastly, what do you need, right? Create a list of the resources that you don't yet have that would better help streamline efficiencies. It's kind of where your vendor and suppliers conversation comes into play, but when you are able to build out your roadmap and then the workflow, it's really easy to then see what's not included, but also more importantly, areas, divisions, companies, or things that you feel like will only add value and benefit and support the overall workflow plan. So, for example, let's take a production company because this is fun. Most people don't realize that a production company is a business at the end of the day. It very much is a business that you are running and that is focused on creating content, right? So I'm going to take a production company as I walk through a workflow example, but I start a company and I'm launching a production company. I want to be in both TV and film. And I may sit down and build a roadmap. And within my roadmap, I identify two divisions. I have a film division and I have a television division. Well, I know from building the workflow that I'm going to need someone to run the film division. And I'm also probably going to need someone to run the TV division, right? I don't want it to just be me. I want to focus on being the CEO or being the manager, so to speak, and the person running the company. So I'm going to delegate and hire two head of departments for both of those divisions. Now, when looking at that, I may assume that, oh, they're also going to need support. So now I'm going to put down that I will probably need a creative exec or a development executive to assist on the film side. And I'll probably need another one to assist on the TV side. And they're probably both going to need assistance as well. So right away, as I'm just mapping out the roadmap, mapping out my workflow, I'm identifying that I'm probably going to need 7 personnel on staff to start the company. But as I look at the overall big picture, I notice a couple things. I notice something's missing. Well, where's my assistant? Do I need support, admin support? So now my 7 has gone to 8, including an assistant that I forgot that I might need. But then I'm also looking at these divisions more closely and breaking down what it's going to cost to really hire all these people. And I realized I actually don't have the resources or the amount that I'll need to start off that large. So how do I scale back? How do I look at the overlap in my current plan? Well, one easy fix is I may actually decide that, well, maybe I don't need 2 separate divisions. Could I hire a head of film and TV and consolidate this division and start there, where instead of 7 people, I now may only need 3 or 4, right? I may need a head of film and TV. They may need an additional executive for support and 1 assistant, 3 people, myself, and my own assistant. So now I've been able to cut my overhead from 7 to 8 people down to 4. And I think, it speaks to the efficiencies, right? It also speaks to what's realistic and what I'm working against. And so this is the things, and this is an example of what I mean by building your roadmap and then turning around to build your workflow, the different areas in which you might be able to identify how to change things around before you even actually launch and get started and spend any real hard cost, right? So this is all part of your strategy planning, your thoughts around how do you build this business and with what support. Think big picture. Again, I am a big believer in throwing out the pie in the sky, big idea. If you can have all the money in the world, what would your company look like just without the restraints that you are currently in? And this is important because in my opinion, without thinking big picture, it's hard to understand the strategy and how to grow it accordingly, right? Because you obviously don't want to start off so big, but you also are able to find the ways that you can scale back and where your starting point is. No different than the example I gave. So, when you're first starting out, if you've never done this exercise before, put it all out there, put it on the page, put everything that you wish that you could have, because one day it actually may serve as a blueprint for what you built your business into versus where you started. So go big or go home. I highly encourage it. And some best practices and advice when talking about building your workflow and creating a roadmap. establish an organizational structure from the top down, whether it's a hierarchy structure, but I do believe in making sure that you're delegating and having dedicated leadership or someone at the top level in a managerial sense who can help oversee and kind of make sure that you're not having to do everything. This also helps just streamline, streamline communication across all areas of your business when you are able to create structures or create divisions and not make sure that you're just investing responsibilities on every employee. They all know what they are there to do. The second tip that I'll give you is to grow strong relationships with your vendors and your suppliers. This is extremely important because, as your business grows, if you're ever in a pinch for any reason, these relationships may be the first things to kind of come in and step in and help you. It's also important because, eventually, depending on, what area or what industry your business operates in, you may depend on these vendors and suppliers in order to even operate, in order to even achieve your end product and your end result, right? So always keep strong relationships, also always negotiate, but it's extremely important to just identify and know who you want to be in business with, who do you want to create these partnerships with. And lastly, you should ask your personnel to contribute their own ideas, right? I think if you're starting a business and it's just you at the moment, that's okay. But definitely get input, or with prospective employees, ask them to contribute what they think your business could be doing to provide or do away with as it relates to either specific task or the job or the overall company. I think hearing directly from the source also helps ensure your employees feel included and that they're content in what the business is doing. But it also kind of helps you at this stage eliminate any blind spots, right? To ask others for their input, ask people who would be working in these environments to contribute what they think is right or wrong about what your current strategy is. So lesson 2, adapting to a new normal. So as we all know, we're not living in normal times, or at least not anymore. The 2020 pandemic has had an impact on every single business. It's had an impact in all of our lives, right? Whether it's a negative impact or whether it's a positive impact, because I have seen some positive impacts, especially as it relates to certain new businesses and different industries. So for my own company, Color Creative, our priorities shifted and we had to set new realistic goals for the remainder of the year. Because keep in mind, the shutdown and this pandemic really started in March. So everything that we set out to do and thought we were going to do in 2020, we had to sit down and take another look at. And I am happy to say that we were able to be successful in the majority of our new goals, but it still brings up a really smart thing to talk about, which is how do you be prepared for this, right? How do you either build a new startup business in this moment that may be more successful during COVID and later not as instrumental, or the reverse? How do you take your company that you just launched a year ago that was supposed to be in person, that was supposed to, do all of this great stuff, but now with the pandemic, there's restrictions or restraints and things that you wanted to do that you no longer can do. So how do you figure this out, right? I'm going to point out a few areas to consider and to think about as you are adapting to this new world, and how to ensure success and be prepared at the end of the day. Number one, kind of look at your industry, right? Whether you are in restaurants, whether you are in the film and television or content business like myself, or maybe you are a small business owner who is creating your own product, creating your own things to sell on to customers. So when you start there, I bring that up because I really think that you should do some research. Look at all of the emerging trends in your industry, and specifically the trends that are linked to the pandemic, not anything that and how the trends were going before everything shut down, but again, more recently, right? What are the trends in this last year in your industry that your business will be operating in, and identify and make note of what those are, right? For example, on the content side, one huge trend has been protocols, COVID protocols, testing and onboarding in order for us to get back into production, right? It is fully shifted our workflow and the way we used to make things and make TV shows and films. And now I can identify different ways that I can build my own workflow to adhere to these new protocols by identifying all the different trends and support and help that some of these businesses might be using. Another example is maybe you're in the restaurant industry and all of a sudden you're noticing, based off of the things you once sold in terms of food and drinks, that there's a new trend showing that more customers are actually buying certain things and less of certain things. And that's maybe just because they're cooped up at home. So maybe it's more soup than normal before. But all of these examples are very loose, but I hope it kind of gives you an idea of what to look out for, right? Identify those trends. The biggest one that I'm sure you guys have all seen is that any physical shopping has primarily or majority moved online, right? Most people are just want to shop now from their couch because of COVID, because stores are closed, because they don't want to go out and be around a bunch of people. So that is a huge trend if you are in the product and services business, and something to really think about as you're building your own operations workflow. The next area to consider is, sitting down and creating the temporary plan that best suits your business needs for the time being. It does not have to be permanent, which leads into my last note, which is everything is in flux right now, right? I wish I could tell you what the world is going to look like in 3 months, but I can't, because day to day, just like you, I am chasing the news and trying to stay updated as much as possible. But there's really no clear end date in sight where we can confidently say that, on this day, things will go back to the way they were. So in order to operate in an environment like that, you have to be able to be flexible. You have to be able to know that your company can pivot at any time, and just be prepared, because things are changing on a daily, and you really want to ensure your company's success. Have a pandemic operating plan. So this is not necessarily how you build your roadmap or your workflow. In my opinion, you should still build that as if it was in a non-COVID world, in my opinion. I say that because on top of that, or aside from that, you should actually create a pandemic plan, right? It's taking your roadmap, taking your workflow, and then looking at that with the lens through this pandemic, through this COVID, and really identifying how your business should be operating for the present day, if anything needs to shift or change. But as a rule of thumb, one big piece of advice about this is that I think you should just have 2 plans, and 2 plans ready at all moments. Your roadmap workflow is your regular normal plan, and plan A is actually your business needs to pivot and scale down in its operations, or its core function needs to change, right? So what I mean by that, examples of scaling down. You are temporarily removing certain products or services from your company for the time being, right? It's costing too much money. It's probably not selling as good as it once was. But another example of scaling down would be limiting office hours, limiting store hours. Maybe you want to shut down your physical store altogether for the time being. So this is plan A. How do you take what you were already doing or what you were planning to do and scale it down nimbly to match the current moment? When I mentioned pivoting your core function, an example of that would be you were planning a physical event this year for your company, or it was producing this event, but now you have to shift it to a virtual event, right? You can still actually ensure its success, but the way you were going to function, the way you were actually going to do it must change. Same thing when shifting a focus from physical sales to online sales. So these are the things to think about as you're building what your plan A is, which is scaling down your operations, and in what ways and how. Those are just some examples, and I'm sure there will be plenty of others as you really break down your own business. Plan B is your business can scale up and operations and or add back in pre-existing or new functions, right? It's almost like having 2 different blueprints that you're ready to shift to. And in the examples of scaling up, I would identify whether you need to hire additional support staff. Do you need to add new responsibilities to current employees to meet demands, right? Really think about the things that maybe your business did not have before, but now it definitely needs it in order to be successful. Open up the dialogue around adjustments and ask your team for their input. I mean, pandemic is stressful. We're all stressed and really going through this together. And I think it's so important to start having weekly conversations with personnel and check in on the morale, right? Check in and see how they're doing. But more importantly, gauge their comfort levels for their roles and for their jobs. And also gauge their comfort levels and talk about your plan A and your plan B, because you may need to pivot quickly at any moment's notice. And so it's really important that everyone on your team is on the same page and everyone is comfortable with what is being asked of them. You know, this may mean people scaling back in their hours. This may mean honestly laying people off and bringing them back when business is up to par. But I think by having a dialogue, it makes everything less stressful and more inclusive. And it's so super important when you're building, especially any new businesses from the ground up. So best practices and advice when talking about COVID and pandemic plans, have a temporary operations plan that you can shift to as needed. As we mentioned, be ready to pivot at any moment's notice. Don't overlook an opportunity for innovation. There may be an added benefit in adapting an area of your business model to accommodate for the current times. You know, I'm a big believer that innovation is also an opportunity for post-pandemic growth. You may find something that you change can actually be a runaway success. With that, stay prepared to adapt to new market realities and adjust your company accordingly to meet your customer needs where they currently are. Lastly, adjust your company's goals as necessary. Again, everything is temporary. It does not have to be forever. So we're gonna move on to the final lesson, which is number 3. Very excited. Thank you for sticking with me. And here, this is the fun stuff. We're gonna talk about outcomes and success and how they look different for every business. I like to tell the story, which is when Issa and I started Color Creative 7 years ago, it did not start as a management company. It was actually an initiative that was focused on building pipelines and support and finding work and opportunities for emerging writers and filmmakers. And we were doing that through various initiatives, various partnerships, and live events, right? We did that very successfully for several years. But along the way, at some point, we actually were looking at the success we were having and the things that we were actually accomplishing and realized that our operations, what we were doing was not as sound as what we should be doing in a business sense, right? Which means our business model needed to shift. It needed to match this thing that we realized, which is we're essentially being managers. We're essentially having a management company. We're identifying talent. We're taking them through the works and helping to boost their careers. So why are we operating not in that way? So we set out to work and we sat down and realized, well, how are we going to build this management company? And as I mentioned before, we sat down and built our roadmap and we built our workflow. By measuring our early success that we were having, we discovered that there was actually a more efficient business model that we could pivot this brand towards that could really scale and really hone in because it just made sense to us. I think measuring and valuing success is more than just analytics and it's more than just profits. It really is your business doing the core functionalities that it set out to do? And if so, what are the other ways in which it's ensuring success and how do you change to adapt to that only in order to grow and only in order to be even more successful? So how to evaluate whether your strategy is efficient. I'm going to talk about 3 areas here that I personally think you should take a really good look at. Area number 1 is competition. This is your competitors, this is the marketplace, but it's really important to sit down and look at and evaluate and compare other businesses' operations against yours. You may be inspired to take note. You may actually see things that they're doing that you should tweak or that you should replicate. And that's okay because we're really talking structurally here. We're really talking divisions here. We're not talking about taking someone else's company's plans and making it your own. We're talking about looking at how other people have built their businesses and what would be considered your competitors because they're in the same industry as you. And looking at yours to theirs, and also looking at their level of success, right? And seeing if it is something you would like to emulate because you might see that they are doing something wrong that you could do better in a very different and more efficient way. So look at your competition and compare their plans to yours. The second area would be your timeline of goals. Most strategies are set against a timeline, and within that, you have to look at and evaluate whether you've been able to accomplish each milestone within the time frame you've set yourself. If you haven't and you find that you have missed those goals or missed that timeline or milestones, pinpoint what areas fell short and why that is. Come up with strategic solutions to help get back on track. And maybe for the next go around, you might need to adjust your goals. You might need to adjust your timeline. Something took longer than you expected. Something took shorter than it expected. But how do you measure whether or not you're being efficient? Well, if you're not meeting your target goals, you could probably be a little bit more efficient somewhere. So this is designed to kind of really help you identify what is causing those problems and how do you make it tighter for the next round. Lastly, money and performance. Looking at the profit and loss statement from your business can help show in specific areas of your strategy that you may need to address. Are you operating within budget? Where is the most of your money being spent? What resources are being allocated, and what resources do you have that you're not even using? What are being overused, right? So it really does kind of lay out the groundwork. And in addition to looking at the profit and loss, and this could be yearly, this could be quarterly, I would also encourage you to look at the performance of each of your employees in each of your divisions, right? What were the goals that they set out to do or that you set out to do for them, for that role, for that division? And did they meet those expectations? How did they meet those expectations? Would you might need to change something up on the personnel side in order to be more efficient? All of these things are essentially the areas in which you can identify to make your business better. I hope that makes sense. But these are the core areas. I'm sure there's others, but this is kind of what I focus on when I'm building my businesses. So best practices and advice. Number one, study your business outcomes. These results will help you evaluate your roadmap strategy. Number two, set yearly and company and quarterly goals. Very, very important. It's how you keep yourself on track and how you set your milestones. And lastly, keep in mind that a business model can evolve over time. What you set out to do now can and will change in even 2 to 3 years. And a lot of that comes from whether you're successful or you're not successful. You might come back and want to change your business model. So know that that's okay, and change is okay. So here's our recap. Key takeaways. Number one, know the core basic elements that make up your start this over. Number one, know the basic core elements that make up your business. Personnel, divisions, equipment and resources. Create your roadmap, and then take your roadmap and create your workflow, and then identify these 3 basic core elements and figure out how they operate and how they make up your business. Takeaway number 2, build a roadmap for operations. This is used to establish your workflow, like I mentioned. And again, emphasize what areas can create synergy and things that can kind of be combined. I am so grateful that you guys have stuck around, and thank you so much for all of your wonderful questions. They're super, super great. This is the end of our webinar. Thank you so much for attending today's digital workshop. And as a reminder, to see all of the articles and stories on Magenta Edge, or to register for upcoming workshops in the series, this is only 2 of 8, guys. There's 6 more incredible workshops coming up. Please visit tmobile.com/magentaedge. Thank you so much for being with me. It's been a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing all of your businesses flourish. Bye, everyone.